topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome to another Ask the Experts, where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. We have got a great show for you today. The famous, the big daddy of them all show. We have our Condo HOA Community Association show with the top law firm, community association law firm in the state of Florida, the K. Bender Rimbaum law firm. And I'm going to say expert, but he's become a friend. Let me introduce you to our expert today, attorney Alan Swartzide. Hi, buddy.
Buddy, appreciate the introduction.
Hey, listen, I got to tell you, if there's a such thing as bedside manner for an attorney, you've got it.
Well, it doesn't exist in most cases, but I like to think I've got it going a little better than some. Appreciate that.
Well, you much deserve it. Hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Did you have a good one?
I did. Got to spend it with my family. Took a couple days off, and then, of course, came back to a barrage of emails that I had chosen not to review and chose to spend the time with my family. I did check them to make sure there were no emergencies, but it was very nice and relaxing. How about yourself, Steve?
You know what? It wasn't long enough, and I kind of got sad. This thing in Israel is just done a number on me, Alan, and we got a letter from somebody saying how the board has asked him to take his Israeli flag down. In fact, he wrote us a letter and wanting to know if they can do that. But it's like sad, like, it's not like this happens every day. And
right.
I don't know, I feel so bad for those people over there. But what's the story on an Israeli flag?
Well, it's not a U.S. flag, it's not a state flag, and it's not a U.S. military flag. And those are the ones, other than first responder flags, those are the only ones that the statutes protect. So if you've got a regulation in your covenants that says you can't raise it, it goes against my personal wishes, but from a legal perspective, the association can tell you got to take it down. I would hope that if they're doing that, then any other flag that is, not specifically regulated by the Florida statutes, that they're telling everyone to take those down as well, unless it's something that's expressly authorized under the documents. Because I certainly wouldn't want a political statement being made that is anti any particular country or religion. I won't take it beyond that, because this is we're not intending to get political here, but I do agree it's really sad. Not only what's going on, but that I would have a legal obligation to tell a client that it's okay to tell someone to take that Israeli flag down, depending on their governing documents.
Right. It's Christmas. We don't, but Christmas is right around the corner. And what is it again up to their docs about what they can put up, when they have to come down when it comes to Christmas decorations?
Yes. And frankly, if there's no regulation, there's a couple different things that you might want to look at when you're trying to regulate things like that. One is look at your governing documents, your rules and regulations, and see if there's a specific provision, like you mentioned, Steve. Does it specifically say for all holidays or for certain holidays you're allowed to decorate, but you got to take the decor down within a certain amount of time, and you can only put it up a certain amount of time before the holiday? And of course, all of this we're talking about, presumably not anything inside the residence, inside a unit in a condo, but we're talking about outside decorations. Especially in a condo, you're talking about a potential material alteration, which is a whole separate issue. But if you're talking about common areas, common elements being changed, we're talking about specifically an owner putting up decor, right?
Right.
Okay.
Let me ask you, what is the purpose of that?
The purpose of the regulations? You asking about the purpose of the regulation? What we're talking about is, and I literally spoke with someone, a manager, about an issue last night where
I think we need to ask him to come back on again. Well, we're here. We're talking with the K-Bender Rimbaum law firm. We're having some technical problems. Hey, it happens. We do a live show. Most of the shows out there are pre-recorded. We do all of our shows live. So sometimes there's problems like that come up that you would not even know about if the show was pre-recorded. Okay, we've got Alan back.
Yeah, Steve, I thought I lost you. It sounds like you guys lost me, so I apologize. But the answer to your question as to what's the purpose of a regulation regarding all of these holiday decorations, I was literally speaking with a property manager, a community manager last night who mentioned that there's a member of a community she works with who has a 13-foot skeleton. And they'll put that skeleton up all year round, and they'll put a different hat or a different decoration on it, depending on what the holiday is. And if you don't have that type of restriction in there, that skeleton lives in the front yard. They just wear a red, maybe a Cupid bow, an arrow, and a heart for Valentine's Day. They wear a leprechaun hat and a gold buckle on St. Patty's or around St. Patty's. But that skeleton is a new resident of your community. Not really something I'd want in my community, although I know a lot of people like the scary, creepy stuff. It's just not my style or my taste. So that's the type of thing that we're trying to control and avoid, is having people that just have decor up all year round, regardless of whether there's actually a holiday or not.
I got to tell you, it amazes me. We got so many letters in this, and boy, you are like becoming a superstar when it comes to this media. We got probably more letters in from your show than the big daddy of them all in Pompano. So you're getting a lot of fans out there.
I'm going to pray for your sake and mine that Robert's not watching right now. That's all I can say. But I appreciate it either way.
Okay. So if people would like to call into the show, we got so many ways that you can ask your question. You can call into the show. We're running it on our boards there if you're watching it on the TV version. If you're listening on radio, it's 561-623-9429. Again, that's 561-623-9429. The other night on Kirsten's show, we had people complaining because they couldn't get in. There was that many people trying to call in.
Oh, sure.
Boy, people just have so many questions now. Alan, you and I spoke last show that I said it's really strange. There's not a lot of people who call in anymore about a service animal And we got barraged. I mean, literally barraged with service animal questions this time. And people are still worried, Alan. I mean, they're worried
That's
about what's
fair.
going on. And I don't know if this is reaching the governor or not, but people are scared about even ending up out on the streets, with the older demographics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of it is reaching the governor, and part of this refers to the cost of insurance. Part of it refers to insurance companies just leaving. Part of it also refers to all of the condo requirements that went into place 2 years ago and were cleaned up a little bit this year, but are still really problematic. I mean, I think we spoke last month about how I actually spoke at an event intended solely for attorneys that practice this area of law and explained with another attorney from Tampa how this is really going to create a reserve crisis where you can't find funding. And if you can find the funding, it costs the association hundreds of thousands of dollars, meaning that it costs each owner thousands of dollars. And that's on the low end. So I wish I could say that I think that there's a fix coming, but there are a couple things, possible funding sources, but now's the time to get your documents amended to try and make it easier for your members to actually, or I'm sorry, your association to either get a loan, levy a special assessment, or adopt a budget that incorporates all this stuff. Looks like Steve went off air, so I'll just go off for a couple minutes until he comes back. But the bottom line is, yes, I'm concerned. I share the concern that a lot of people are expressing, that this is it's an ongoing issue and it's not getting any better. We, and when I say we, I mean a lot of attorneys from our firm, probably 4 or 5 of us, along with attorneys from other firms, property managers, licensed community managers, we're all telling the legislature that this is going to kill the condominium economy in Florida, and it's already hurting the condo and HOA economy. Forget about the people that are not even in a community association who still have to deal with the insurance issues. Which frankly, I don't know. It may actually be harder if you're not in an association to get that insurance because you're not protected by any association that's going to maintain those property values. So the best I can say, Steve, is that people like me and my firm are working on it, and that's about as far as I can go right now. Whether the governor's aware of it, I hope he's paying attention is all I can say.
Well, it's sad, and you can tell in these people's letters that they're really nervous. But you know what? This is not the board's fault. You can't blame this on the board. I mean,
No,
these
this
are
is
just
all the legislature.
just insurance alone.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
agree. It's the insurance was supposed to be improved by legislation that came out last year. And I think most of us knew that that was not going to help. And we're hoping that within the next few years it might help, but are not optimistic. But, the changes to the Florida legislature regarding condo reserves and reserve studies is almost purely detrimental and was largely reactive. And no matter how much our committee tries to get it fixed, it's just not happening yet. So we're going to keep trying. That's about all we can do. And, all we can do is keep begging the legislature to not only make changes, but make changes that actually make this make sense. I mean, the bottom line is an association is already required under Florida law and usually under the Declaration to properly budget for whatever is going to be required to fully maintain and operate the community. So from my perspective, if you're requiring reserves, what you're saying is that requirement doesn't really mean anything, that they already have to properly operate and maintain the community. If they're not doing it, the board of directors, like you mentioned, it's not their fault that this legislation came out or that the insurance industry has kicked Florida in its proverbial teeth. But the board does have the ability to do something about the fact that they're not funding everything properly. If the associations would fund assessments correctly, there would be no need for reserves whatsoever. So I wish I had a better answer. But like I said earlier, the bottom line is, these boards can only do what they can, and it's a very difficult situation that a lot of people are facing. So I wish I had more, but unfortunately I don't. Let me see. I don't think Steve is with us right now. So I'm going to go ahead and open up. I know he sent me a list of questions that people had asked that I haven't looked at because, like he said, I like to keep this kind of live and hopefully a little bit entertaining for everyone. But we'll turn this into a little brief webinar. So Steve mentioned the emotional support animals earlier. We got like 15 questions regarding that issue in the last month since our last session here on the show. So the first one was Jack from Orlando asks, I'm confused what an emotional support animal is. When I saw no support animals in Publix, I Googled it. Emotional support animal is a pet since it doesn't have any training. So let's go through the different types of animals that we are talking about. And a pet is neither an emotional support animal nor a service animal. If it's either one of those two things, just understand you're not talking about a pet under Florida law or federal law. If it's one of those two things, you're talking about an animal that performs a specific function. So this individual, Jack, is correct that a service animal is only one that's trained to perform a specific function. But an emotional support animal can be pretty much, for any reason. And those are the ones that Publix has said, sorry, but, you don't, from their perspective, I'm not saying this necessarily is accurate, but from their perspective, the members who are walking into a Publix shopping store are not required or shouldn't need to have an emotional support animal because it shouldn't be a stressful experience to shop at Publix. Now, anyone that's been to Publix knows that's usually not the truth. However, the bottom line is, it's a different issue when you talk about Publix versus an HOA or a condo. But I want to make sure that everyone understands that emotional support animal is absolutely not considered a pet under Florida or federal law. So that is Jack, you've been misinformed, and I don't blame you because, frankly, most people don't understand this stuff. I see Steve's back. Steve, I took one question while you were gone. The first one on the list you sent, like I said, I'm going to just keep it live. So I'll turn the lead back over to you.
I tell you what,
it's amazing when you do a tape show. You don't have any of these problems, but we're like one of the few people that have the guts to do a live show. And so people that can call in with their questions. But, if you ever have technical problems, these are the things that you have to be aware of. But I'm going by the phone, and we've got a ton of questions. I guess, you saw the service animal question. And I was just thinking, I saw Publix is no longer allowing a dog in their store.
Yeah, that's the one we just addressed. I agree. It's a little odd that a store like Publix that talks about, all their commercials, especially during the Super Bowl and holidays, are all about family and supporting one another. It was a little surprising to see that. I don't really have a problem with saying you can't have a dog in a food store, but the bottom line is some people really do need that emotional support animal to be able to go about their day-to-day business. So I'm not going to be the guy that tells you Publix is right or wrong, but I can understand where it's coming from is about all I can say. But as to the, that is a pet and not a something that is needed by someone with a disability, I would have to disagree there. If someone has a disability, usually that's going to be severe anxiety or something like that. If it's another type of disability, usually you're going to be dealing with an actual service animal. But the emotional support animals are a legitimate need for a lot of people. Just because it's somewhat new concept doesn't mean that it's not valid, in my opinion. I do think there are plenty of people that are taking advantage of that, the fact that exists as a concept under Florida and federal law, and the fact that those laws greatly benefit the person that claims to have a disability over anyone that doesn't give them that accommodation. But neither here nor there at this point. We just have to give guidance under the law. That's what lawyers are supposed to be doing. We don't get to make decisions. That's what our clients do.
One thing I want to mention, Juan, our great producer, is going to have to let us know when we have a phone call, because I can't see. I have no eyes. I just have audio today. So, Juan, you'll have to let us know if we have a phone call come in. And while we're talking about a phone call coming in, the phone number here is 561-623-4929 if you have a question for Attorney Allen. Alan, in the radio business, there's certain words that we're not allowed to say. If you do, you can really get a very hefty fine. I think it's like 7 words that you cannot say on the air. So we got a letter from a lady, I think her name is Phyllis, in Orlando. And she wants to know, I guess she's on the board now. She wants to know, is there a list of things that you can get in trouble about as a board member, a not to do list?
Well, George Carlin does a great job, or did a great job of explaining that, but I won't touch on that one because I don't want to get you guys in trouble. But bottom line, there's no specific list, but if you look in your governing documents and see what the association must do or must not do, not doing any one of those things that you're required to do or doing one of those things you're not allowed to do could get the directors in trouble. It could get the officers in trouble, could get the association in trouble. I would say the same thing about the governing documents. I'm not aware of a specific list that is written down anywhere, like the 10 commandments of being a board member. But there is a ton of case law, Florida statutes, Florida administrative code, and your governing documents. So those are the things that are going to dictate what you can and can't do. So there's no specific list, but there is a laundry list that does exist. It's just not written down specifically anywhere in a concise form. My best guidance I can give, if you're not 100% sure you can do it, which, let's be realistic, you're probably not 100% sure, you should be running it by your property manager and or your attorney. Anytime that you're not 100% convinced that, well, my attorney has told me that we can do this. Given the amount of people that pretend to practice in this area of law but have no idea what they're doing, I would suggest that even if your attorney told you in the past what you can and can't do, 1, they might have been wrong, and 2, the law might have changed since 2-3 years ago, so you might want to get a fresh opinion anyway.
The classes, you offer free classes, certification classes. In those certification classes, do you teach anything about the new laws that are starting next year?
Absolutely. Actually, I just did one on Tuesday for HOA board members. And that's one of the things that we go through is here's what changed from last year and here's how it impacts you. So yes, we tend to do that in every board certification class. I do the same thing in a covenant enforcement class, which I will usually talk about, self-help or the statutes that have changed over the last year or so, some of the case law that has changed the law. So the short answer to your question is absolutely, those are things we talk about. But one thing that I'll recommend is that anyone that wants to know what laws changed over the last year, go to Rembaum's Roundup at our website, kbrlegal.com, under the resources tab. Jeff Rembaum's Roundup broke down that issue perfectly of every change that was made to the Florida statutes that actually impacts community associations. Between the board certification classes, which, by the way, are recorded and available after the fact, just not for credit anymore, and Jeff's Roundup emails and articles, I think we've got pretty much everything covered. We also do a legal update seminar that's also been recorded and goes into a little bit more depth than Jeff's Roundup article about the legal updates. But you can access that. It's about 20 pages long, and it'll give you every piece of information. He did a better job of writing it all down than I would ever do. trying to sit there and go through statute by statute, which, by the way, is exactly what he did.
Well, the reason why I actually even asked this was we had Zach in Orlando, and he wanted to know. He said, we are a 2-story condo. And he said, are we required to have a reserve study completed? And they don't, do they?
No, I'm glad he clarified the 2-story part, because it's 3 stories and above that actually need to do that. So congratulations, you're safe, and you've probably saved yourself or your community a couple $100,000 by making that clarification.
Hey, Alan, I'm starting to see a lot of commercials on TVs now for about architects and engineers. I wonder why.
Yeah, crazy, right? You'd never anticipate that the fact that suddenly Florida's requiring all this stuff would create a brand new industry that really didn't exist, or was at least significantly limited before. You know, all the people that were actually getting reserve studies done were just following advice of counsel. Now it's something you need to do. I think it's always been a good idea. It's just that most people said, I don't want to spend the money. I'll go by inflation, and then I'll be $200,000 underfunded by the time we actually have to maintain or repair these things that we're saving money for.
Well, some of these people are going to get an awful big assessment, aren't they?
They are. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but I think we're going to be doing a lot more collection work than our clients would like over the next couple.
Right.
You know, it's not something we like to talk about because it's a taboo. Oh, we're taking someone's house or their unit. But the bottom line is, if you can't afford to live in a community association, whether that's because of your funding or the legislature forcing you to pay thousands of dollars more than I think should be necessary, you know, the association has to have that money. And so if you're not paying your assessments, that's part of what Florida law and your governing documents are going to say, is that you don't get to stay.
But am I right in saying it's really not the board's fault? Unless you're just poor management.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, in most instances, let me clarify that absolute, because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do. The bottom line is, you know, yes, in most instances, it's not the board's fault. They didn't control the insurance industry deciding that they were going to triple and quadruple insurance rates. They didn't control the government telling all of the condos in Florida that are 3 stories or above that they need to have studies done that'll cost tens of thousands of dollars, or that they need to reserve amounts that are going to be another $100,000 or more per item. That's not the board's fault. And frankly, forget about being the board's fault. It's not even something the board can control, because now that it's required, the board has a legal obligation. Not only the board, but the individual directors have a fiduciary responsibility, meaning they are like trustees of the association. This is the highest duty imposed by law in Florida. So what that means is they absolutely must make sure that they're fully funding reserves, that they're paying for insurance, whether that means that some of the people that live in the community, including them, can't live there or not. It doesn't really change that legal obligation.
We just had a text come in. They want to know if you get many calls from residents saying they don't trust what the board is doing. Do you get those calls?
We get the calls, but it's not necessarily something that our firm works on. But I do have a bunch of attorneys.
But their question is, what % of those phone calls turn out to be accurate? That's really what his question is. In other words, really.
So that's a different question, because do I get the calls? Absolutely. Yes. Do I find that most of the people that make those calls know what they're talking about and are correct, that the board is actually doing wrong, versus a lack of communication or a lack of understanding? Completely different answer. I would say about 20 to 25% of the ones that we get, the calls that we get, are actually accurate legal analysis that the board is doing something wrong. Most of them, it's either a misunderstanding of what the board has to do or can't do or can do, or it's someone not having enough information to even give me the information to make an informed decision as to whether they have any kind of claim or not. Most of the time, it's not actually something being done wrong. It's something being done that this individual emotionally and personally doesn't like.
Alan, do you have the schedule? We're running it right now on the board. Do you have a schedule of your classes coming up?
I do. So the firm and I in particular are going to be very busy this month. I've got actually tomorrow a class on the importance of updating your governing documents. I'm going to go through something that I haven't really in the past for this class, which is here's some terrible case law and some terrible statutes that you might want to address in your governing documents. So that's tomorrow via Zoom. Still time to sign up at kvrlegal.com under the calendar. We've got, and that one again, I'm teaching. We've got Emily Gannon teaching our fair housing assistance animal or pet course. So that first question that I addressed while you were out for a minute, Steve, that's the type of thing we'll be talking about, or Emily will be talking about on December 5th from 11:30 to 12:30. We've got a joint condo and HOA board member certification class that I'll be teaching on behalf of Century Management. They're hosting it. That's December 12th from 11 to 2. That's a long one because it's a joint class. And then we've got a covenant enforcement class that Kirsten Henza from our Tampa office will be teaching on December 13th. So all of these are via Zoom. They're all free, just like most or all of our educational programs. And you're welcome to just go on our website, sign up, and show up at the class. The way we do it is usually just Jeff Solomon and the person that's teaching the class explaining all this stuff. And there will almost always be time for question and answer after the fact.
This is election time, isn't it?
It is. It's budget season and election season. So don't expect to be able to reach your property manager unless that's what it's about for the next month or so.
And those people who are thinking about running for the board, tell them about the certification.
Okay. Yeah, good idea. And frankly, I think this should be a mandatory thing. It's mandatory in some respects. But essentially, you've got two options. Once you go on to the board, you've got 90 days to either sign a piece of paper that says, I've read and will uphold what's in our governing documents and the Florida statutes, or you take a class like the board certification course that we're talking about right now. The clear winner of an option for me is the class. And that's because you actually get educated during that class. You learn, you understand Florida law if you've got a good instructor. When you read your governing documents, when you read the Florida statutes, it's the driest material you could possibly find. I mean, think about, and no offense to anyone that enjoys Moby Dick, I haven't actually read it, but it's that or I don't remember the book that's like 1,000 pages long. That's was written in the 50s or so. But it's that dry material that is difficult to get through, even for attorneys like me. The other thing that you're going to see is that there are conflicts between your governing documents, and Florida law. So instead of trying to understand all that and sign a piece of paper that doesn't mean anything to anyone, what I would suggest is spend the 2-3 hours to get some education, find an attorney that teaches the class for free and that's going to be at least a little bit interesting. And I only promise to be a little bit interesting. But find a class that's actually going to make you understand. We had a question before. Is there a list of things that boards shouldn't do? Well, part of the list is what you'll hear during this board certification class. You'll also hear part of the list of here's what you should be doing. And if you've got a manager and an attorney, 75% or more of the work should be done by those two people. So I think that attending a board certification class is very important, even if you are intending to be on the board sometime in the next year. So Steve, you mentioned it's election season now. If you attend my class on the 12th, it'll still be good for the next year after that. So if you're planning on being part of the election in March, you can take the class today, and that certificate that you get afterwards will still be valid. But that certificate, whether it's the piece of paper you sign or the piece of paper that someone gives you for having completed the class, is something that needs to go in the association's records so that you can prove you've done at least the bare minimum which is what we call this. It's kind of like people talk about getting a black belt as the beginning stage of learning martial arts. A lot of people look at it as, oh, I know everything. No, that's square one. That's you've got the basics. And it's once you go from first degree to 10th degree black belt that you actually become a master. So attending this class is getting your black belt. It's you got the basics. Now let us, as attorneys, and let your community manager get you to that 10th degree by giving you the guidance you need.
Did I hear something that, because education is so important, did I hear something that they're going to make it a mandatory educational?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there's a couple people within the firm. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of us within the firm that are pushing certain legislative initiatives. This is one of them, because I think that education is so much more valuable and so crucial for people to understand how they're supposed to be running a business, which a lot of directors don't even understand that's actually what they're doing. So you need to understand that, yes, you're a volunteer, but you're still running a business. You need to be taught how to run a business. Otherwise, it's kind of like starting your own ice cream shop with having never made ice cream before. That's what you're being expected to do. And also not being paid for it, even if you do well. So rely on the experts. Take a board certification class. But to answer your question yet again, no, that's not something that's required. It's not something that's explicitly coming down the pike, but we're praying that it works out anyway. And several people within our firm are pushing for that to happen, because we do think that it's so important for people to be educated, not only with the board certification, but the classes that I like to call electives. You know, I mentioned the fair housing, the covenant enforcement, the governing documents. All of these are, keep in mind, what we're talking about here is getting free legal advice. Why would you turn that down? And if you do turn it down, from my perspective, it means you may not care enough about your community or doing things the right way that you should be on the board. So yes, there is a push to make that mandatory. It's not yet.
You know, it's funny, you hear people complaining how the board's doing this, the board's doing this. You know what? If you got a problem with how the board is running things, run for the board. You run for the board. Make changes.
Well, and as much as I hate to even suggest it, if the board's not being transparent, you've got methods of getting information instead of just presuming that the board's doing it wrong. That's another problem I see constantly, is the presumption that because you don't know what the board's doing, automatically they're doing it wrong. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe try and find out instead of going on Facebook and blasting your entire community.
Yes.
What I see happening way too frequently, but I'll stay off the soapbox on that one. I've spent too much time talking about other stuff to go into detail on that, but trust me when I say I could.
Here's an easy question from Helen in Kissimmee. 4 volunteers to the new board. One does not want a position. Bylaws say the first meeting board shall elect a president, a vice president, secretary, and treasurer. What do we do with one who does not want a position?
2 options here. 1, you appoint a 5th director. Presumably your bylaws were not drafted in such a terrible way that it actually says you should have an even number of directors, because that's what's called a deadlock guarantee almost. So appoint another person if your bylaws allow for more than 4 board members. If that's not the case, or if you can't find anyone else to serve, then it depends what your bylaws say with respect to whether those people can be the same person. Sometimes you can have someone who is a treasurer/secretary. If your bylaws don't say that's not allowed, then it's an alternative. The fact that this person doesn't want to have a position, even as vice president, who, you'll excuse me to all the people that are vice presidents of their communities that might be on the call, but that person doesn't do diddly squat. That person is literally just available if the president is unavailable. That's their entire role. So tell them they should be VP and that they won't actually have any responsibilities, and that they can resign as president if they ever actually have to take over. That'll resolve the issue. So I guess I actually gave three possibilities. But the first one is appoint someone else and put them in one of those roles. That's the easiest one, although it may not be the easiest to actually find someone to fill that spot.
Oh, this next person must be a relative of yours. Alex in Sanford says, "What a great show, Alan. Thank you so much." You got to have your cousin stop calling into the show, Alan. It's not right.
Well,
he says,
Alex is my neighbor to the north, not necessarily my cousin. But listen, like I said earlier, I'll take it where I can get it, Steve.
Okay, send the check to him. He wants to know, does moving money from one reserve to another require a percentage vote by the board?
Usually that'll be, and this is presuming you can even do that shift, it'll be a percentage vote by the members, not the board.
Right.
Usually it's going to be something, if you're shifting the funds to another reserve account, or you're using the funds for a purpose that's not established in the reserve. In other words, you want to clean up the roads, but you're using funds from the roof reserve. All of that is going to require a member vote. Now, because we've got such a mess in the legislature right now with respect to condo reserves, I'm not even going to get into the complexity. And again, I'll refer you back to Rembaum's Roundup, the legal update from 2023. For all of that stuff, I'm not going to waste our time with it right now. But the bottom line is, the only way you would really be able to move funds from one reserve component to another is if you're operating under a pooled reserve and you use the funds for a different item that's also in that same pool. So that's something that the board could vote on. Anything else, when you're moving or waiving reserves, that's a member vote. It's not a board vote.
Okay. Very good. Alan, another thing that people, I don't think they really understand what the board's responsibility is. Is there an overall way to explain that?
Well, I'll tell you what the board does, and maybe that'll explain a little bit better their responsibility. So people talk about the board president, the board treasurer. That doesn't exist. It's a misnomer. The treasurer, the secretary, the VP, the president, those are officers. The board of directors, or the directors is the way that I refer to it usually, those are the people that do nothing other than this. They make motions, they second motions, they discuss motions, they vote on motions. Or they abstain from voting because they have a conflict, and there shouldn't be any other reason to abstain. 5 things. That's all they do. Now, that said, they make 90% or more of the decisions for the association. But that's all they do. They make the motions, they second them, they vote on them, they discuss them. That's it. So these are the people that make the decisions for your association because you elected them to do it. Right. An association is a mini democratic society is the way that I'll put it. Possibly with less election concerns than some of our state, federal, and local government even. But it's basically a small community, or it could be a large community, but much smaller than most of the ones we're looking at, where these people make the decisions. Okay? They may be the same people as the officers, they may not. But the officers have specific duties that are assigned in the bylaws. Most of those, if you're managed by a community association manager, are actually the manager's job. So most of the time, the directors don't do a whole lot, even though they're the most, you'll excuse me, but the most important people in the community. So if that doesn't explain what they do, I don't know what to tell you, because all they do is make decisions. That's it. So it's very important, and it's a very technical way to look at this. But the bottom line is all the directors do is make decisions and look into things as to what decisions should be made, get guidance on what decisions should be made, etc. So, there may be wrongdoing, but if it's the board, it's usually going to be in the way that they made their decision. Either they didn't have a board meeting when they needed to, they held a closed meeting without a lawyer present and without talking about staffing issues for employees of the association, or they did something else where they voted and it might have been in their own self-interest rather than the interest of the association. But when people say the board is doing something wrong, what it really means is they don't like the way that the community is being operated or maintained. That's it.
Well, you make it sound so easy. We have a Sally in Winter Park says her president of their board is putting in storm windows into the community. It's
Okay.
his company. Is that a conflict?
If it's his company, yes, it's a conflict. But all that's required in that instance is that he disclose the conflict in advance. The statutes in HOA land were changed this year so that it's specific. You need to provide 14 days notice before that meeting where the board's going to vote on the contract for this window company. And then a supermajority of the directors, so that's 2/3 of the people other than this individual, actually need to vote in order for the contract to go through, rather than a simple majority of a quorum of directors. So it's going to be 2/3 of all the directors here. And then the other requirement that we would have is that that individual who is conflicted out, so to speak, would abstain from the voting and wouldn't participate in the board discussion. They can still propose the contract, but they can't participate in the board's discussion. They have to step out of the room when the board discusses it and votes on it. They can speak as a member, but they can't speak as a member of the board because they don't want undue influence. Now, keep in mind, a conflict is not always a bad thing. This individual who is already volunteering his or her time for the community as president and as a director might be giving the association a great deal because he's got a company to do the work wholesale. So don't think that every conflict is bad. What's bad is when you don't disclose the conflict and the deal is not fair and reasonable is the term the statute uses. If it's a fair deal, okay. Keep in mind the members have the right at the next member meeting to basically say, we want to cancel this contract if the conflict wasn't disclosed. But conflicts aren't always bad. I like to point out.
I want to get in Helene's comment. She wanted to know, why aren't board members paid for doing this kind of work?
I think that's a great question. The unfortunate truth is that you would most likely have a lot of people that sit on the board and do, thank you, George Carlin, for reminding me, do jack. I will skip the next word. They do nothing on the board. And we already have that even with volunteers who volunteer to do something and then do nothing. So you'd have people who are taking these positions solely for the pay, who, just like in every other industry in presumably the world, are going to spend half their time sitting around but still collecting pay. It also, having that incentive to have paid directors, I think might be a good idea because you are running a business. But I think that if you're talking about paid directors who live in the community, I think they would see that as their full-time job. And frankly, pardon me, being a director is not intended to be a full-time job. You should be relying on each other. Now, don't get me wrong, it can become one very easily, especially I know we represent a couple communities that are 1,200 lots, 800 lots, 3,000 lots. And all of those directors, they basically have a second full-time job. But it shouldn't be that way. You know, for a smaller community, you shouldn't have the kind of issues where you need to be working a lot at this. It should be a volunteer effort because you are assisting yourself by assisting your community. At least that's my opinion. So yes, that might be helpful to get more qualified people on the board, but I don't necessarily think it's a great idea.
I don't know how we made it through this show. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong today, except for we had a great guest. Give everybody the phone number, the main number that's good for any of the offices, Pompano, Palm Beach, Tampa, and Orlando.
Sure. So it's 954-928-0680. And like you mentioned, Steve, that will reach all of our offices, including my office, which is the Orlando office. I'm the managing partner here in Orlando. So anyone that wants to work with our firm, I would welcome you to reach out either at that number or my email address. And I thank Jeff Renbaum every time that I talk about it. It's as@kbrlegal.com. Easiest email address I've ever had, even better than my personal Gmail account. So those are the easiest ways to contact me. as@kbrlegal.com. My email address is easily the easiest. Sorry for putting it that way. But regardless, you're welcome to reach out to us anytime if we can help your community. Representing community associations is all our firm has done since the 90s. And it's something that, in my opinion, and I think Steve shares the opinion, we do it pretty darn well.
You represent Cave into Rimbaum so well. I'm not sucking up to you, but anyway, listen, I'm not going to see you before Christmas, so have a wonderful Christmas, a happy holiday. You'll be back with us again next month, and I know we'll have a bunch more questions for you. Alan, as always, you're the best, bro.
Likewise, my man. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll look forward to the next one. Everyone have a great holiday season in the month that I won't see you.
So that's it for us today. Listen, have a wonderful weekend and stay safe. We'll see you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.